Previously, Elara, the woman who felt nothing in a world of destined bonds, had her silence shattered at the Alpha Prime Ball, not by one fate, but three. The legendary Triplet Alphas, Kael, Rhys, and Soren, claimed her before the gathered supernatural elite with a single, shocking command: pretend you are with us. For now, whisked away to their fortress, she found herself in a prison of impossible luxury and cold rules. But within the gilded cage, the bond began to speak. She was told she is the weapon. What weapon? To destroy or to unite their kingdom? The pretense is over. The game has become a war for their very souls. Now the story continues. Yes, he met her eyes, his gaze relentless. Unified with you as a true partner in rule, our triad becomes unbreakable. Our combined strength, plus a politically savvy Luna, could unite the territories under a stability not seen for generations. We could end the border skirmishes, broker lasting peace with the Citadel. He paused, letting the weight of the possibility hang in the air. Then his voice hardened. But divided? If the bond festers into jealousy, if you are perceived as playing favorites, or if you are captured, manipulated, or killed, you become the weapon that shatters us. The bond would tear us apart from the inside. The pact would demand a bloody resolution. The ensuing civil war between my brothers and I would fracture the territory, leaving it bleeding and vulnerable for anyone to take. He stood, walking to the window, his back to her. The old stories in that book you found, he said, and she started, unaware he knew she'd read it. They end in bloodshed because the mate was seen only as a prize to be won. A trigger for the curse, not as a strategist, not as a queen. I will not let that history repeat. I will make you a queen, even if I must be the cold architect who builds your throne. He turned back, his expression once more the unreadable mask of the Alpha. The intellectual intimacy was gone, sealed away behind a wall of dire necessity. Study these, he said, nodding to the dossiers. We will continue tomorrow. He left her then, alone in the vast library with the maps and the dossiers and the terrifying, dual-edged truth. She was not just a woman, not just a mate. She was a weapon. And her first lesson was learning how not to cut herself and everyone she was now bound to apart. The weight of Rhys's lesson, the maps, the dossiers, the cold reality of being a weapon, sat heavily on Elara. She sought motion, an outlet for the restless energy coiling inside her. The fortress had a state-of-the-art training hall, usually empty at this hour. She was wrong. Kael was already there, a whirlwind of controlled violence. He moved through a complex series of strikes on a reinforced combat dummy, his movements a blur of lethal grace. Shirtless, sweat glistened on the cords of muscle in his back and arms. Each impact was a thunderous crack that echoed off the high ceilings. He sensed her the moment she stepped in. The rhythm of his strikes faltered for a half-second before resuming. Harder, faster. The bond between them, a constant simmering thread, flared into a low burn. Elara ignored him, moving to a clear mat to begin stretching, focusing on her breath, trying to find the calm Soren had shown her. But Kael's presence was a gravitational pull, a live wire in the room. The sound of his strike stopped. Silence, thicker than the previous noise, descended. You shouldn't be in here. His voice was a gravelly rumble, still edged with the breathlessness of exertion. She didn't look up. It's a training hall. I'm training. Training for what? He scoffed, walking closer. She could feel the heat radiating from him. To be a better political pawn for Rhys? He's filling your head with strategy. It won't save you when a rival's claws are at your throat. Now she looked up, meeting his golden eyes. They were fierce, challenging. Maybe I'd like to be able to do more than just be saved. A dark, humorless smile touched his lips. Fine, show me. He gestured to the space in front of him. Attack me. Her heart kicked against her ribs. That's ridiculous. Why? Because I'm an alpha. He took another step, crowding her space. The scent of him, sweat, leather, and that primal smoke and ember smell, was overwhelming. The bond gives you strength. You just refuse to touch it. You're too busy being scared of it. Anger, hot and sudden, flared in her chest. I'm not scared of the bond. Liar. The word was a soft, vicious accusation. You flinch from it, from me. You run to Soren for quiet and Rhys for books. You love the idea of the power, but you're terrified of the feeling of it. The raw, messy, real part of it. The part that's me. His words cut too close to the truth. The frustration of the past weeks, the confinement, the politics, the fear, the overwhelming, conflicting pulls of all three of them, boiled over. You think you're the only real part? She shot back, standing her ground. You think your anger, your violence is the only truth? It's just another kind of cage. His expression darkened. You call this a cage? He spread his arms, encompassing the hall, the fortress. This is the only thing keeping you alive. This bond, my strength, is your shield. And you treat it like a disease. Maybe it is. The words tore from her, fueled by a pain she hadn't named. Maybe this whole thing is a cursed disease and we're all just infected. Something in his eyes shattered. The anger melted into something raw, pained. He moved so fast she didn't have time to react. His hands came up, not to strike, but to frame her face, his touch searing. Then let it consume us, he growled, his voice thick. Stop fighting it. Stop fearing what you are, what we are. His emotions, frustration, possessiveness, a desperate, wild yearning, flooded through the bond, a tsunami against her walls, and in that moment something in her broke. Not with fear, but with a furious, defiant need to push back. She didn't think. She just shoved. But it wasn't a physical shove. It was a surge of raw, unfiltered emotion. All her fear, her anger, her trapped power, channeled directly down the blazing cord that tied her to Kael and, through him, to his brothers. The training hall's far wall, a solid foot of reinforced stone and magic-warded concrete, exploded outward. Not a small crack. A section 6 feet wide disintegrated into rubble and dust, exposing the gray daylight beyond. Silence. Dust motes danced in the sudden shafts of light. Kael's hands were still on her face, but he was utterly still, staring past her at the destruction, his eyes wide with shock and a fierce, blazing pride. Elara was breathing in ragged gulps, her whole body trembling. She'd done that. She had, not them, her. Kael's gaze snapped back to hers. The shock was gone, replaced by a hunger so intense it stole the air from her lungs. The bond between them was a white-hot brand, singing with unleashed power and mutual, terrifying understanding. See? He whispered, his voice rough with awe. That's your fire. And then his mouth was on hers. It was not like Soren's almost kiss. This was no tender gravitation. This was a claiming. It was fierce, desperate, and hungry, fueled by the adrenaline of shattered stone and shattered barriers. His lips were demanding, his taste wild and intoxicating. The bond roared in triumph, the fire in it raging unchecked. Elara didn't resist. She kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands fisting in his sweat-damp shirt, pulling him closer. It was a clash, a release, a confession. In that kiss was all the frustration, the anger, the undeniable, magnetic pull that had terrified her from the first moment. When they finally broke apart, gasping for air, the world had shifted. The dust was settling. The wall was gone, and the careful, painful pretense between them was utterly incinerated. Kael rested his forehead against hers, his breathing as ragged as hers. He looked at the destruction, then back at her, a wild, possessive light in his eyes. No more pretending, he breathed. The taste of Kael was ash and fire on her lips. Back in the sterile silence of the moonlight suite, Elara stood at the window, not seeing the moonlit valley. She saw the shattered wall. She felt the echo of the power that had torn it down, and she felt the scorching brand of his kiss. Her body still hummed with it. The bond, once a tangled knot, now felt like a live wire, freshly fused and crackling with energy. But it wasn't just Kael's thread that burned. The kiss had sent a shockwave through the entire connection. She could feel Soren's thread, a sudden, sharp spike of startled concern followed by a deep, wounded confusion that made her chest ache. He had felt it. The sanctuary they'd built, the tender almost promise, now had a crack running through it. And Rhys? Rhys's thread had gone cold. Not absent, but a frigid, calculating stillness. She could almost see him in his study, halting all activity, processing the emotional explosion as a strategic breach, a variable becoming volatile. Guilt, thick and choking, washed over her. She had kissed Kael with a fury that felt like destiny, but in doing so, she had fractured the fragile unity she was supposed to be the apex of. She was becoming the weapon Rhys warned of, the one that could shatter them from within. The conflicting feelings were a maelstrom inside her. Soren's kindness was a safe harbor. His quiet strength, his fear for her individuality, was a balm to her soul. He saw the person, not just the power or the problem. Rhys's intellect was a potent drug. To be seen as an equal in mind, to be entrusted with the map of their survival, made her feel capable, significant in a way she never had. And Kael was a wildfire. He was the raw, untamed truth of the bond, the passion that refused to be managed or intellectualized. He saw her hidden power and dared her to embrace it, consequences be damned. She cared for them all, differently, deeply, confusingly, and the sheer impossibility of it was tearing her apart. She had to stop this. She had to rebuild the walls, not of stone, but of necessity. The pretense was gone, but maybe distance could save them. If she pulled back, if she became cold, if she focused only on the political role Rhys had outlined, perhaps she could stop the jealousy from taking root. Perhaps she could prevent the curse's bloody prophecy. The next morning, she dressed in a severe, high-necked black dress. She arranged her face into a neutral mask. At breakfast, she was a ghost. When Soren entered the dining room, his eyes seeking hers with quiet questions, she gave him a small, polite smile that didn't reach her eyes and looked away, focusing on her tea. The wounded flicker in the bond from his direction was a physical pain, but she hardened herself against it. Kael strode in, his usual restless energy now underscored with a smug, possessive heat. His gaze went straight to her lips. Elara kept her expression blank. Her tone flat when she answered his gruff morning with a simple, "Alpha Kael." His confidence faltered. A frown touched his brow, the bond bristling with confused irritation. Rhys was last. He observed the frosty tableau, his mercury eyes missing nothing. He said nothing about the destroyed wall, only discussing a minor trade negotiation. When Elara offered a concise, analytical opinion on the matter, perfectly mirroring his own style, he gave a slow, approving nod. But his approval felt like a lock clicking shut. She was playing the part he'd designed. It was what he wanted, and it made her feel hollow. She spent the day in the West Wing library alone. She avoided the alcove where she'd read of the curse. She avoided the living gardens. She read dry historical texts, building a wall of facts around her heart. When Soren found her there late in the afternoon, she could feel his approach as a gentle pressure against her self-imposed barricade. "Elara," he said softly, standing a few feet away, respecting the space she'd put between them. "The garden is particularly green today. The night bloomers are just waking." It was an invitation back to their sanctuary, to honesty. Her heart ached. She kept her eyes on her book. "I have too much to study, Alpha Soren. The history of the eastern border is complex." The use of his title was a deliberate knife. She felt him flinch through the bond. The gentle pressure withdrew, replaced by a sorrow so profound it threatened to crumble her resolve. "I see," he murmured. After a moment, she heard his quiet footsteps retreat. She had done it. She had pushed away the warmth. She had locked down the fire. She had become the cool, logical asset. And as she sat in the silent library, the triple pulse in her chest felt like 3 separate heartbeats, beating out of sync, each one a lonely, echoing chamber in the fortress of her making. The walls were up. And for the first time, she understood that the real cage had never been the fortress. It was the fear in her own divided heart. The fortress felt like a tomb. Elara's self-imposed isolation was a chill that seeped into the very stones. The brothers, each wounded by her withdrawal in their own way, moved through the days in a tense, fractured silence. The bond was a landscape of fault lines. Soren's quiet sorrow, Kael's banked, frustrated fury, Rhys's icy focus on damage control. 3 days after the training hall incident, a storm raged outside, mirroring the tempest within. Elara was in her suite, trying and failing to read when the summons came. not from Mara. All three of them were at her door. Rhys stood central, his expression grave. Kael loomed behind him, jaw tight, eyes avoiding hers. Soren's face was pale, etched with a deep, reluctant resolve. "The rain has triggered a landslide on the northern pass," Rhys stated, his voice devoid of its usual clinical edge. It was simply tiring. "The pack is mobilized. While they work, there is something we can no longer avoid. The vault, now. The vault. The origin text. The heart of the curse." There was no room for refusal. The gravity in his tone, the united front of their presence despite the rift, told her this was the end of secrets. They led her deep into the bedrock beneath the fortress, to a door of aged iron and silver runes that hummed with ancient magic. Rhys pressed his palm to it, then Kael, then Soren. With a groan of metal, it swung open. The vault was small, circular, and lined with shelves holding only a few, terrifyingly old artifacts and books. In the center, on a stone pedestal, lay a single open tome, its pages illuminated by a cold, magical light. Beside it rested a dagger, its blade dark and stained. "The compact," Rhys said, gesturing to the book. His voice echoed in the hollow space. "And the blade used to seal it with the blood of the three brothers, Corvin, Alistair, and Thorin Blackwood." He turned to face her, the light casting harsh shadows on his face. "What you read in the library was the scholarly summary. This is the source, and you deserve the unvarnished truth." Soren stepped forward, his gentle voice heavy. "Our ancestors were not noble lords. They were ambitious warlords, losing a war. In desperation, they sought power from an ancient, cruel spirit of the forest. The bargain was this: their bloodline would produce triple heirs of unmatched strength, their minds and wills linked, making them an undefeatable unit. In return," Kael finished, his voice a raw scrape. "In return, the bloodline would be bound. Not just the triplets, all of it. Everything they were, everything they had would be shared. Not by choice, by magical compulsion. Lands, title, victory, pain, loss." He met her eyes finally, his gaze haunted. "And mate." Rhys pointed to a passage in the ancient book, the script jagged and dark. The text specifies, "A true mate, should fate grant one, shall be a triune blessing and a triune burden. The bond shall be split, a living tether between four souls. It shall be a crucible. Harmony will forge an unbreakable dynasty. Discord will be a poison, turning the bond from a source of strength into a conduit for jealousy, rage, and ultimately fratricide." The words hung in the cold air. Fratricide. "For generations," Rhys continued, "no true mate appeared. The curse was theoretical. We ruled, we shared the burden of power and the occasional migraine, and we believed we had mastered the pact. We were a unit. Then you walked into that ballroom." Soren moved to the pedestal, his finger tracing the stained dagger. "The bond didn't just connect us to you, Elara. It activated the full, dormant terms of the curse. We don't just share you. We are now compelled to share every feeling we have for you. Kael's passion isn't just his own. Rhys and I feel its echo. My protectiveness, Rhys's strategic regard. It bleeds across the link. It's why the old stories end in blood. The bond amplifies everything. Without perfect harmony, it turns love into obsession, care into rivalry, passion into a battleground." Kael slammed a fist against the stone wall, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "It's a trap. Fate gives us our other half, then forces us to fight our own brothers for her." "No," Rhys said sharply, turning to him. "Fate gave us our whole. She is not a half to be split. We are four parts of one entity under this curse. The trap is in seeing her as a prize to be won. That is what the curse preys upon. That is the discord that leads to the blade." He looked back at Elara, his exhaustion laid bare. "Your withdrawal, the walls you've built. It is a form of discord. It starves the bond of what it needs to create harmony. Honesty, acceptance. But your fear is valid. We are a dangerous prospect. We are asking you to tie your life to an ancient, volatile magic that has a history of ending in tragedy." Soren came to stand before her. "We brought you here because you have a right to know what you are a part of. The choice was taken from you at the ball, but the choice of how to proceed, that must be yours. Even if the curse makes it feel impossible, The full horrific truth settled over her. It wasn't just a quirky fate or a political scandal. It was a magical, generational prison sentence. Their connection wasn't just emotional, it was a magical law, a compulsion that could twist the purest feeling into something monstrous. She looked at the ancient dagger, the stained proof of the original brother's bargain. She looked at the three men before her, the strategist weighed down by duty, the warrior tormented by his own fire, the healer aching for peace, all bound by a chain forged centuries before they were born. And she was the new living link in that chain. The curse was real. The doom was possible. But as she looked from one face to another, she saw not monsters, but prisoners. Just like her, the walls around her heart didn't just feel pointless. They felt like a betrayal of the very honesty the bond demanded to survive. The truth of the curse was a stone in Elara's shoe, a constant, grating reminder with every step she took. Harmony or bloodshed, those were the only paths. The brothers, laid bare in the vault, had retreated into a watchful, tense quiet, giving her space she hadn't asked for but desperately needed. A week after the revelation, she sought a sliver of normalcy. The conservatory, a glass-walled room filled with citrus trees and flowering vines, was neutral ground, not Soren's wild sanctuary, not Rhys's ordered library, not Kael's volatile training hall. She was pruning a wilting orchid, her mind a whirlpool of curses and tripartite bonds, when a smooth, unfamiliar voice spoke from behind her. A delicate touch for such a potent subject. Elara jumped, nearly dropping the shears. A man leaned against the archway, smiling. He was handsome in a classic. Polished way, sun-streaked hair, green eyes, an easy confidence. He wore the insignia of the Silvermane pack. "Alpha Tauren," she said, recognizing him from Rhys's dossiers. Her guard slammed up. This was the rival whose daughter had hoped for, Kael. The one Rhys said saw their bond as a personal insult. "Please, just Tauren," he said, pushing off the archway and walking toward her with a casual grace. "We're all alphas here in a sense, aren't we?" His tone was light, but his eyes were shrewd, assessing. "You're a long way from the coast," she said, keeping her voice neutral. "I came to offer formal congratulations on your choosing," he said, though his smile didn't reach his eyes. "And to see the wonder for myself. The woman who ended the Blackwood Triad's legendary bachelorhood." He stopped a polite distance away, his gaze flicking to the triple mark on her wrist, which she'd taken to leaving uncovered. "A unique signature. Is there something you want, Alpha Tauren?" she asked, tired of the preamble. His smile faded into something more earnest, more intimate. He glanced around, confirming they were alone. "I want to offer you a life raft, Elara. May I call you Elara?" She didn't answer. He continued, his voice dropping. "I know what they are. The Blackwood curse isn't the secret they think it is. I know you're trapped in a magical contract you never signed, forced to split your soul 3 ways to be a focal point for their instability." He took a half-step closer, his scent of sea salt and clean linen a stark contrast to the smoke, frost, and pine she was drowning in. "I saw your face at the choosing ceremony when Rhys gave his little speech. You looked like a prisoner at her own sentencing." His words struck a nerve so raw she flinched. He saw it. "It doesn't have to be that way," he pressed, his voice soft, compelling. "Mate bonds can be contested, especially one as unnatural as this. My pack is strong. My influence is significant. I could petition the council. I could offer you a legitimate challenge to this triune farce." Elara stared at him, her heart thudding. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," he said, his green eyes holding hers with an intensity that was entirely for her, singular and focused, "that I could get you out. You could have a normal life. A normal bond. With an alpha who would be yours, and yours alone. No sharing. No ancient curses waiting to snap. No walking on eggshells between 3 volatile men. Just devotion, freedom, a coastline instead of a fortress." The offer hung in the fragrant air, beautiful and devastating. A normal bond. Soul devotion. Freedom from the impossible, crushing complexity. No more divided hearts. No more fear of being a weapon or a trigger. Just simplicity. It was everything she'd never had and had secretly ached for. She imagined it for a dizzying second. a clean, clear bond to one man. A life where she wasn't a political keystone, a magical anomaly, a walking catastrophe. But as the tantalizing image formed, something within her, the braided, cursed, infuriating bond, gave a sudden, painful twist. It wasn't jealousy from the brothers. They were distant, unaware. It was her own soul, protesting the imagined amputation. The thought of severing the fiery thread, the cool, clarifying thread, the warm, anchoring thread. It felt like imagining the loss of a limb, or a heart. Soren saw her hesitation. He misinterpreted it as fear. They've isolated you, haven't they? Made you dependent, but you're stronger than they think. I can feel it. You weren't meant to be a shared resource. You were meant to be a queen in your own right. He reached out, not to touch her, but to offer his hand, palm up. A choice. Think about it. The offer stands. A way out, Elara. All you have to do is want it. He gave her one last long look, then turned and left as quietly as he had come, leaving behind the scent of the sea and the echo of a devastatingly simple alternative. Elara stood frozen, the pruning shears hanging limp in her hand. Before her was the beautiful, ordered orchid. Behind her, through the glass, lay the wild, complicated, cursed territory of the Blackwood Triad. One offered a pristine, solitary bloom. The other offered a tangled, dangerous, living forest. And her heart, divided as it was, already knew which wilderness it called home. Soren's offer was a ghost in the room, a scent of salt and freedom that clung to Elara's skin no matter how she tried to wash it away. She had told no one. But the bond, that cursed, sensitive tether, was not so easily deceived. She was in the shared living space, trying to read the same paragraph for the 10th time when Kael stormed in. He didn't enter. He erupted. His eyes were molten gold, his entire body thrumming with a barely contained rage she hadn't seen since the night at the gate. He crossed the room in 3 strides, stopping inches from her chair. He didn't touch her. He just leaned down, his voice a low, venomous growl. "You smell like the ocean." Elara's blood ran cold. She kept her eyes on her book. "I was in the conservatory. It's humid." "Don't!" he snarled, snatching the book from her hands and throwing it aside. It hit the wall with a slap. "You smell like him. Soren. That preening coastal bastard was here. He was close to you." The truth was a flare in the bond. She couldn't hide it. Her fear, her guilt at even listening, bled across the connection. It was all the confirmation Kael needed. His control snapped. "He thinks he can poach what's ours." The ours was a snarl. "He thinks he can offer you something better? A normal bond?" He spat the word like a curse. "Is that what you want, Elara? After everything? After the fire? After the kiss? You want to be some boring coast wife with a boring, single-minded alpha?" His jealousy was a wildfire in the bond, scorching and possessive. It pulled Rhys and Soren into the room as if yanked by chains. Rhys appeared in the doorway, his face a mask of icy fury. "Kael, stand down, now." "Don't you tell me to stand down." Kael whirled on him, the focus of his rage shifting. "Your strategy. Your politics. It leaves holes in our walls for snakes like Soren to slither through." He was here. "Talking to her. And where were you?" "Calculating grain tariffs." Soren moved to stand between Kael and Elara. His calm shattered, replaced by protective urgency. "Shouting at her isn't the answer, Kael." "Can't you feel how scared she is?" "I feel that she listened to him," Kael roared, making Elara flinch. "I feel the doubt in the bond." "So what's your solution, Soren? More patient understanding? More gentle gardening while another alpha tries to steal our mate?" Rhys stepped forward, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "This is the curse at work. It is amplifying your jealousy, Kael." Soren's move was predictable. He saw an opportunity. Her visible isolation, our internal tension. This is a strategic probe, not a romantic overture. We treat it as such. "A probe?" Kael laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "He's offering her a way out, Rhys. He's offering her everything we can't. Because of your precious pact. Because we're a damned committee instead of a man. And what is your solution?" Rhys shot back, his own control fraying. "Force her? Claim her completely and publicly like an animal? That would play right into Soren's hands. It would prove his point that we're savages bound by a curse. Soren turned to Elara, his eyes pleading. Elara, please, talk to us. What did he say? But Kael wasn't listening. He pointed a shaking finger at Elara, his gaze locked on his brother's. This ends now. No more waiting. No more letting her adjust. She is ours. The bond is real. I demand she accepts it, fully publicly in the old way, before the moon turns. Or I will challenge any man, brother, or rival who stands in the way of what is mine. The ultimatum dropped like a guillotine blade. Mine, not ours. The fatal word. The crack in the triad. Rhys's face went pale with fury. You will do no such thing. You will not fracture this triad over your impatience. Your ultimatum is a declaration of war on us. Soren's voice was desperate. Kael, you're doing exactly what the curse wants. You're letting it turn your love into a weapon against your own blood. Love? Kael's voice dropped to a deadly whisper, his eyes solely on Elara now, wounded and furious. How can I love what is constantly slipping away? How can I share what doesn't want to be held? The words were a physical blow. Elara stood up, tears finally breaking free. Stop it, all of you, just stop! But it was too late. The foundation was shaking. Kael looked at his brothers, his chest heaving. You choose. Her and the bond as it was meant to be, true and claimed. Or your precious pact and your cold, safe strategies. But you won't have both. He turned and stormed from the room, leaving a silence more violent than his shouts. Rhys looked at Soren, a profound betrayal in his eyes. He would break us. Soren looked at Elara, his heartbreak a tangible ache in the bond. Then he looked at the door where Kael had left, his loyalty torn asunder. The unity was shattered. The first explosive fight had happened, and Elara stood at the center of the wreckage, the ghost of Torin's offer feeling less like freedom and more like the last lifeboat on a ship she had just watched split in half. The silence after Kael's ultimatum was a living wound. Rhys had withdrawn to his study. A door closed with finality. Soren had vanished into the depths of the fortress, his calming presence a palpable absence. The bond was a battlefield of cold fury, shattered trust and deep echoing sorrow. Elara stood in the center of the moonlight suite, the ghost of their shouted words still ringing in her ears. Catalyst, weapon, division. The curse was doing its work, and she was the pivot upon which it turned. Torin's offer wasn't freedom. It was proof. Proof that her very presence was tearing apart the unity that had defined the Blackwoods for generations. She was the trigger for the bloodshed the ancient texts promised. A desperate, clear thought cut through the grief. Remove the trigger. If she left, the bond would stretch, perhaps snap. The brothers would have nothing to fight over. The curse would have no purchase. They would hurt, but they would heal, together. As they always had, before she ruined everything. It was the only act of love she could think of. She moved quickly, silently. She took nothing from the fortress. Only the simple clothes she'd arrived in, now folded at the bottom of a wardrobe. Dressed in them, she felt like a ghost of her former self. She wrote no note. Words had caused this. More words would only be weapons. The fortress was eerily quiet, the usual hum of activity subdued in the aftermath of the triad's fracture. She used servants' passages, moving on memory from her wanderings. Her heart was a frantic, trapped bird against her ribs, but her mind was a cold, determined stone. She reached a small, secondary exit used for groundskeeping, a heavy metal door locked by a keypad. She had seen Mara use the code weeks ago. With trembling fingers, she punched in the numbers. Beep. The lock disengaged with a heavy clunk. Night air, cold and sweet with the scent of pine and freedom, rushed in. For a second, she hesitated, looking back into the sterile, lit hallway. Then she stepped across the threshold. She took 3 steps onto the gravel path leading into the dark forest. And the world ended. It was not an emotional pain. It was a physical, violent severing. 3 cords, braided into the very fabric of her soul, were yanked taut and then torn. Not apart from her, but through her. Agony, white-hot, blinding, all-consuming. It dropped her to her knees on the gravel, a silent scream locked in her throat. It was Kael's fiery thread, ripped like a muscle. Rhys's cold, logical thread, snapping like a frozen cable. Soren's warm, anchoring thread, fraying like a ruptured artery. Their pain, their shock, their betrayal, their sudden, catastrophic loss flooded into her, multiplied by 3. But she wasn't the only one. Inside the fortress, 3 separate cries of anguish echoed. In his study, Rhys collapsed against his desk, clutching his chest as if stabbed, a strangled gasp escaping him as his brilliant mind was swamped with pure, animal loss. In the training hall, Kael, mid-punch against a bag, roared in physical pain, stumbling and falling to one knee, his fury extinguished by a wave of desolation so vast it stole his breath. In his greenhouse, Soren dropped the fragile seedling he was holding, doubling over with a sob, his empathy turning into a conduit for shared, shattering heartbreak. The bond did not allow escape. It was not a tether that slipped. It was a root system, and they were all part of the same tree. To tear one out was to maim the whole. Elara writhed on the ground, the pain lessening from catastrophic to merely unbearable as the bond, protesting the violent strain, settled into a throbbing, insistent pull. It was a gravitational force, dragging her back toward the fortress, toward the source of the agony. She couldn't think, couldn't breathe. She could only feel the inexorable draw and the shared, debilitating misery of the 3 alphas. She hadn't taken 10 steps, but she was crippled. They were all crippled. Footsteps, uneven, staggering, crunched on the gravel behind her. She managed to turn her head. It was all 3 of them. Rhys, pale and leaning against the doorframe, his composure in ruins. Kael, his face a mask of pain and furious relief. Soren, tears cutting tracks through the soil on his cheeks. They had felt her leave. They had felt the bond scream. And despite their fracture, the primal instinct to retrieve their missing piece had united them in desperate, shared purpose. Kael was the first to reach her. He didn't speak. He simply gathered her up from the cold ground, his arms strong but shaking, and held her against his chest. There was no anger now, only a raw, trembling possessiveness born of shared trauma. Rhys limped closer, his analytical mind broken by the physical proof. The bond, it's a biological imperative, a magical organ we all share. You cannot. We cannot. Soren placed a hand on Kael's arm, his touch connecting them all. His voice was a broken whisper, echoing the inescapable truth they had all just learned in the most violent way possible. We are one, he breathed. The word's not a romantic ideal, but a brutal physiological fact. To leave is to try to tear out your own heart. It will kill us all. Elara looked from one pain-ravaged face to another, the last of her resolve crumbling. There was no escape, not through distance. The curse, the bond, their fate, it was all a single, inescapable truth. They were not 4 separate people tangled together. They were one being in 4 parts, and it was time to stop fighting it. Kael carried her back into the fortress, not to her isolated moonlight suite, but to the heart of the Triad's private quarters, a spacious, lived-in den with deep chairs, worn rugs, and a massive fireplace. The door to the outside world was sealed, but the true barrier that had fallen was the one between them. They were all wrecked. The psychic trauma of the failed escape had left them hollowed out, trembling. Rhys sat stiffly in a chair by the fire, his head in his hands, the strategist finally defeated by an equation with no solution but one. Soren knelt by the hearth, mechanically building up the flames. His shoulders slumped under an unimaginable weight. Kael placed Elara on a wide sofa, and then sank down beside her, close but not touching, his usual restless energy utterly spent. No one spoke. Words had been weapons and lies. Now there was only the shared, painful truth vibrating in the air, and the bond raw, tender, and throbbing like a fresh wound. The silence stretched, but it was not empty. It was full of understanding, hard-won and brutal. Elara was the one who broke it, her voice a dry whisper. I can't leave. It wasn't a lament. It was a surrender to fact. Rhys lifted his head, his mercury eyes reflecting the firelight. No, he agreed, the word stripped of all its former cold calculation. It was just the truth, and we cannot force you to stay in a way that makes you wish to. The attempt is mutually destructive. Kael let out a long, shaky breath. I was wrong. The admission was gruff, torn from him. The ultimatum, Trying to claim you like territory. It's what the curse wants. It turns love into a war, Soren added softly, still staring into the flames. And I was wrong to think patience alone could protect you from the pressure. From us. Elara looked at each of them, seeing not just alphas, but 3 men bound and broken by the same impossible love that was breaking her. And I was wrong to think running would fix anything. It just hurt us all. In the ashes of their failures, a new fragile blueprint began to form. Not spoken aloud, but felt. Through the bond that was slowly knitting itself back together. Stronger for having been strained to its limit. They had to move as one unit, yes, but not as a wall closing in on her. As a circle with her at the center, each connection honored. Rhys, the mind, would share his world of strategy and power. Not as a lesson for a pawn, but as knowledge for a partner. An equal. Kael, the fire, would share his passion and strength, not as a demand, but as an offering. A gift to be met with her own rising power. Soren, the anchor, would share his peace and empathy, not as an escape, but as a foundation, a home within the storm. And she would have to stop being a ghost in the machine. She would have to choose to be present. To accept the fiery thread, the cool thread, the warm thread. To weave them, with her own will, into something new. As this silent accord settled over them, the bond, as if rewarding their fragile truce, began to deepen in a new way. Elara closed her eyes, and she saw, not with her eyes, with Kael's. A flash of the room in heightened detail, every shadow sharp, every ember in the fire a distinct, pulsing star of heat. The image shifted. She felt the cool, flowing logic of Rhys's mind, tracing the probable outcomes of this night, not with fear, but with a dawning, cautious hope. The strategy was still there, but its purpose had changed. Then a wave of Soren's profound sensory awareness, the smell of the pine resin in the firewood, the soft texture of the wool rug beneath her feet, the steady, calming rhythm of his own heartbeat, a drumbeat of stability. She gasped, her eyes flying open. They were all looking at her, their own eyes wide with shared wonder. You felt that? Soren asked softly. I felt, Elara stammered. Kael's lips quivered in the ghost of his old, fierce smile. The bond's not just for sharing pain. It's for sharing strength, too. Rhys nodded slowly, a true, unguarded curiosity in his gaze. The text called it convergence, the point where the shared senses begin. It's a sign of the bond maturing, of acceptance. It wasn't overpowering. It was a glimpse, a whisper. But it was a promise. The curse wanted to split them into warring factions. But the bond itself, if nurtured, offered a deeper union. A convergence. Kael reached out, his movement slow, deliberate. He didn't take her hand. He simply laid his palm open, face up, on the sofa between them. An invitation, not a demand. After a moment, Elara placed her hand in his. The connection was warm, steady. The fiery thread hummed, content. Soren rose from the hearth and came to sit on her other side. He didn't touch her, but his calming presence was a tangible warmth against her arm. Rhys remained in his chair, but he leaned forward. His posture open, his gaze inclusive. The circle was complete. No one pretended anymore. The fragile balance was not a fix. It was the beginning. The first step on a new, terrifying, and undeniable path, not as 4 individuals trapped, but as one soul learning, for the first time, how to be whole. The fragile piece of the den became a new foundation. In the days that followed, there was a quiet, purposeful shift. Meals were shared, not in tense silence, but in quiet conversation. Rhys would discuss a point of pack law, his gaze seeking Elara's input, truly listening. Kael would train, and sometimes he'd pause, glancing toward the window where she might be walking with Soren. His expression not jealous but watchful, a part of him connected to her calm. Soren's sanctuary remained her refuge, but now it was a place they sometimes sat in shared. Wordless quiet, the bond humming with peaceful resonance. The bond's new depth was a constant, low-level miracle. She'd catch a scent Kael detected on the wind, rain coming, a deer in the far woods. She'd feel a flicker of Rhys's satisfaction when a negotiation concluded cleanly. She'd share Soren's quiet joy at a new seedling's first leaf. But it was Soren who came to her one evening, his eyes serious. The moon is full tonight. It's a time of power, of revelation. The bond, it's asking for something. Not demanding, asking, I can feel it. Elara understood. The convergence was a door cracked open. It was time to step through. They gathered not in the fortress, but at the heart of their territory, a stone circle on a high, wind-swept cliff under a sky drowning in stars, the full moon a massive silver coin overhead. It was a place of old magic, before pacts and curses, a place of pure power. The brothers stood at 3 points of the central stone, Rhys at the north, Kael at the south, Soren at the west. Elara stood in the center. No one spoke. The wind whipped her hair and her simple linen dress. This was not a public ceremony. This was for them alone. Rhys began. He lifted his hand, palm facing the sky. The mind, he said, his voice carried away by the wind but heard clearly in her soul. For strategy, for clarity, for the unwavering will to protect what is ours. A thread of cool, silver light, visible only to their bonded sight, spiraled from his palm toward her. It was logical. It was resolved. Then Kael. He lifted a clenched fist, then opened it, as if releasing a captive flame. The fire, he growled, the sound raw with emotion. For passion, for strength, for the fury that will burn any threat to ash. A thread of blazing gold-orange light roared from his hand, a comet of pure will, joining Rhys's silver strand in the space before her heart. Finally, Soren. He placed both hands over his own heart, then extended them outward. The anchor, he whispered, his voice the steady heartbeat of the earth itself. For empathy, for peace, for the roots that hold fast through any storm. A thread of deep forest green light, solid and warm, flowed from him, intertwining with the silver and the gold. The 3 threads of light hovered before her, a braid of destiny, of curse, of potential waiting. This was the choice. Not to be claimed by them, but to claim them. To accept the triune nature of the bond, not as a burden, but as her own source of power. Elara closed her eyes. She didn't just see the threads with the bond's new sight. She felt them in her core. The cool clarity, the hungry fire, the steadfast earth. She felt her own soul. The silent pulse that had waited a lifetime. The will that had shattered a wall. The heart that had tried to run to save them. She reached out. Not with her hands, with her will. With her love, messy and conflicted and real. She reached for Rhys's silver thread. I accept your opinion. I will stand with you, not behind you. The thread snapped taut, connecting, and a shock of crystalline clarity filled her, sharpening her senses, the world resolving into patterns and possibilities. She reached for Kael's golden fire. I accept your fire. I will meet your strength with my own. The connection seared through her, a torrent of invigorating, fearless power, making her blood sing and her spine straighten. She reached for Soren's green anchor. I accept your peace. I will build a home with you. The connection rooted her, a profound, unshakable stability spreading from her feet deep into the stone below, tying her to the living world. The 3 threads didn't just connect to her. They fused. Power, unlike anything she had ever felt, flooded the circle. It wasn't just her power or theirs. It was theirs, a singular quadruple force. The moonlight seemed to brighten, the stars to pulse in time with the beat of one shared heart. For a breathtaking moment, they were not 4 individuals. They were one consciousness in 4 bodies. Elara saw through all their eyes at once, the strategic layout of the territory, the heat signatures of life in the forest, the intricate web of roots in the soil. She felt Rhys's awe at the mathematical perfection of their union, Kael's exultant triumph, Soren's overwhelming, joyous relief. Then gently the vision faded. The overwhelming power receded to a steady, thrumming current in their veins. The threads of light dimmed, but the connections were now permanent, solidified, glowing softly within the bond. Elara opened her eyes. The brothers were looking at her and at each other, with expressions of stunned reverence. The ritual was complete. The first union. No words were needed. The bond sang with a new, unbreakable harmony. The curse was not broken, but for the first time, they had wielded the bond not as a shackle, but as a tool of their own making. They had glimpsed their true potential. And it was terrifying. And it was glorious. The euphoria of the union lingered like starlight in their veins. The shared power was a warm, humming current between them as they made their way back to the fortress. A quiet, profound understanding weaving them together. For the first time, the future felt less like a cursed sentence and more like a path they could walk together. But the ancient world is a balance. A seal broken, a power awakened, rarely goes unnoticed. As they crossed the threshold of the fortress, a collective psychic flinch went through them. It was Soren who staggered, a hand flying to his temple. The earth. It's sick, he gasped, his connection to the land turning from a comfort to a conduit of pain. Kael's head snapped toward the north windows, his predator's senses flaring. Something's in the woods, old, wrong. Rhys went utterly still, his mind, now hyper-sharp from the union, racing through data, the surge of power from the ritual. It was a beacon. The texts. They never specified what force our ancestors bargained with, only that it was bound by the pact. Elara felt it too. A new foul pressure at the edges of the bond, a cold spot in the warmth of their new connection. And then a voice, not heard with ears, but felt in the marrow of her bones, in the 3 glowing marks on her wrist. It was a dry rustle of dead leaves, a grating of stone on stone. At last, the key turns. The voice was hunger. It was malice. It was an ancient boredom ending. Every light in the fortress flickered violently. The ground gave a single lurching shudder. From the direction of the sacred stone circle, miles away, a column of sickly, green-black light pierced the night sky for a single, terrifying second before vanishing. Panic, sharp and cold, speared through the bond. But it was a shared panic, instantly communicated and met with a surge of protective resolve from the brothers. They moved as one, herding Elara into the center of the main hall, their bodies forming a protective triangle around her. What was that? Elara whispered, her own newfound power coiling defensively inside her. The other half of the curse, Rhys said, his voice tight. The ancestors didn't just make a bargain. They trapped the entity they bargained with, using the Triad's unified power as the lock. Our pact wasn't just a price we paid. It was a seal. Kael's growl was a promise of violence. And our little moonlit reunion just rattled the bars on its cage. The 4-in-1. The voice slithered into their minds again, focused now. The convergence is sweet. But the apex? The female? She is the lockpick. Bring her to the stone, break the seal, and the power they stole shall be wholly yours. The offer was a poisonous whisper, aimed not at the brothers collectively, but at each of them individually, seeking the cracks the curse had once exploited. To Rhys, it whispered of absolute, unchallengeable control. To Kael, it promised a singular, unrivaled strength. To Soren, it offered a peace forever unbroken. But the union held. The whispers met a wall of newly forged unity. They snarled in unison, shaking off the invasive thoughts. The entity's focus narrowed, a scalpel of hatred aimed directly at Elara. Or I will take her, and unmake your pretty bond from the inside out. A wave of crushing psychic pressure targeted Elara alone. It felt like the air being sucked from her lungs, the warmth leaching from her blood. The 3 marks on her wrist burned with an icy cold. She cried out, doubling over. Instantly, the brothers reacted. Kael pulled her against his chest, his own heat battling the chill. Soren placed his hands on her shoulders, channeling a flood of stabilizing energy. Rhys stood before them, his will a visible, silver shield in the psychic plane, deflecting the assault. The pressure retreated. But the malevolent presence lingered at the edge of their territory, a storm gathering. It knows it can't tempt us while we're united, Rhys panted, the effort of the psychic defense showing. So it will try to divide us. Or it will come for her directly. She is the key, the apex of our power. Without her, the convergence fails, the seal weakens further. Elara straightened, pushing back the fear. The entity saw her as a weakness, a tool. But the union had shown her what she truly was. She looked at her 3 alphas, her partners. It wants me because I'm the part that makes the whole work, she said, her voice gaining strength. It's not just targeting the mate. It's targeting the heart of the triad. The truth was both terrifying and clarifying. The ancient evil hadn't awakened because of their love. It had awakened because their Love had forged them into something powerful enough to threaten its prison. The first battle of the choosing ceremony was politics. The first skirmish at the gate was physical. This was different. This was a war for their very souls, for the integrity of the bond itself. And the battlefield was Elara. Kael's arms tightened around her. "It can't have you." Soren's energy solidified into a vow. "It will not touch you." Rhys's eyes were chips of glacial steel. "Then, we must prepare for a war we did not choose. The seal is compromised. It is coming. And it wants what makes us strong." The entity did not wait for dawn. It struck in the witching hour, when shadows were longest and fear was easiest to sow. It did not send armies. It sent the land itself. Trees, twisted into clawed, walking horrors, slammed against the outer walls. The earth vomited up shambling mounds of rock and rot. Spectral wolves, their eyes glowing with the same sickly green-black light, flowed through the shadows, their howls a psychic attack that frayed nerves and sowed panic. The fortress was under siege not by an enemy, but by a corrupted nightmare. Chaos erupted. Hack warriors, brave and disciplined, fought a foe that felt no pain, that reformed from stone and root. The wards flared and sputtered under the assault of pure, ancient malice. In the command center, a room of glowing maps and communication. Runes, Rhys was a storm of cold fury, barking orders, redirecting forces to collapsing sectors. But the enemy was everywhere at once, adaptive, cruel. Kael was a blur of obsidian fur and golden fury in the courtyard, holding the main gate against a tidal wave of rock flesh. But for every monster he shredded, 2 more took its place. He fought not just with strength, but with a rage born of the entity's whispered threat to Elara. Soren was in the heart of the fortress, a healer and a bulwark. He channeled his energy into reinforcing the wards where they thinned, his face pale with strain as he fought, to keep the corruption from seeping into the very stone. But he was one anchor against a tsunami. And Elara stood at Rhys's side in the command center. But her battlefield was not the map. It was the bond. The psychic noise was deafening, fear, pain, fury, the enemy's whispering taunts. It was a storm threatening to drown her. But the Union had changed her. She was not a receptacle anymore. She was a conductor. She closed her eyes. She didn't see the runic displays. She saw the battle through 3 sets of senses at once. She felt Kael's position, a blazing star of fury at the gate. She felt the growing strain in his muscles, the moment a corrupted root snaked toward his blind side. Without opening her eyes, she spoke, her voice calm, clear, and directly threaded into Kael's mind through the bond. "Kael, left flank, low. A root, burn it." In the courtyard, Kael reacted without hesitation. A jet of flame erupted from his maw, incinerating the threat a second before it could ensnare his leg. A flicker of startled gratitude crossed their connection. She felt Soren's energy, a steady, green light fighting a spreading stain of decay on the western ward. He was tiring, the stain seeping deeper. Her mind touched his. "Soren, the corruption is anchored 10 feet below you, near the old well. Don't fight the symptom. Cleanse the source." In the lower levels, Soren's eyes widened. He shifted his focus, driving his power downward like a spear. The surface stain flickered and died as he severed its root. She felt Rhys's brilliant mind, a supercomputer overheating with too many variables, trying to plug a dozen breaking holes in a dam. She reached for him. "Rhys, you're managing points, not patterns. The attacks are a feint. They're hurting our forces to the east. The real breach is coming in the North Vault. It wants the origin text." Rhys's head snapped toward her, his mercury eyes sharpening. He saw it instantly, the pattern she'd perceived through the shared, intuitive sense of the bond. He redirected a squad of elite guards not to the screaming east wall, but to the silent, fortified north corridor. Seconds later, the stone around the vault door began to bleed black ichor and crack. The elite guards were there to meet it. Elara became their telepathic nexus. She was the strategist, interpreting the flood of sensory data from her alphas and feeding back razor-sharp insights. She was the heart, sending pulses of calm resolve to Soren, fierce encouragement to Kael, crystalline clarity to Rhys. She was no longer a damsel to be protected in a safe room. She was the linchpin of their defense. The bond was no longer just a connection. It was their command network. Kael, fall back 3 paces. Let them cluster, then use the shockwave. A concussive blast of alpha power cleared the courtyard gate. Soren, the ward at point 7 is about to fail. Redirect from point 3, it's stable. The flickering ward solidified. Rhys, they're tunneling under the east wall now. It's a trap. Flood the tunnels. A cascade of enchanted water, held in reserve for fires, was released into the subterranean passages, washing away the burrowing horrors. The tide began to turn, not because they were stronger than the ancient entity, but because they were smarter, more unified. 4 minds, 1 purpose. As the first gray light of dawn stained the sky, the assault lessened. The corrupted trees retreated, the spectral wolves dissolved into mist. The entity, thwarted, withdrew its immediate presence, but its hatred lingered like a poison in the soil. The siege was over, for now. In the command center, Rhys turned to Elara, his usual composure shattered into pure, unvarnished awe. Kael, shifted back to human form and streaked with grime, strode in, his gaze finding hers with a look of fierce, unquestioning pride. Soren arrived, exhausted but radiant, and without a word took her hand. They had fought as one. They had won as one. And they had discovered in the crucible of siege their most powerful weapon. Her. The dawn brought no relief. The silence after the siege was the quiet of a held breath. The entity's hatred had seeped into the land. The ground beneath the fortress now pulsed with a slow, sick rhythm. Cracks spiderwebbed up the interior walls, oozing not water, but a thick, dark sludge that smelled of rot and forgotten graves. It was not attacking from outside. It was undermining the foundation. It's targeting the ley line convergence beneath the vault, Rhys said, his face etched with a new kind of dread. If it corrupts that, it won't need to break down our walls. It will turn the fortress into our tomb. They stood in the cracked main hall, the bond humming with shared tension. They had won the battle, but the war was entering a deadlier phase. A section of the floor 10 feet away suddenly liquefied, collapsing into a yawning pit. From the darkness below, a single, colossal tendril of pure shadow and jagged stone erupted, whipping across the room. It didn't aim for the walls. It didn't aim for Rhys or Soren. It arrowed straight for Elara's heart. Time seemed to fracture. Kael, who had been prowling like a caged panther near her, moved. But not to push her aside. He moved into the path. The tendril, tipped with a blade of cursed stone, slammed into his chest with a sound that was not an impact, but a sickening, wet crunch. Elara's scream was ripped from her soul. But what happened next was worse than the physical blow. As the tendril pierced him, Kael did something unthinkable. With a final, gargantuan effort of will, he didn't just brace against the pain. He grasped the fiery, golden thread of his connection to the bond, the thread Elara had so recently accepted, and he tore. It wasn't a full severance. It was a brutal, deliberate amputation of his own piece of the braid. He severed his tether to Elara and his brothers, a desperate, last-ditch shield. The logic was horrific and pure. If the bond was a conduit for shared power, maybe it could also be a conduit for shared death. He would take the mortal blow alone. The effect was catastrophic. For Elara, it was as if the sun had been blotted from the sky. The fire in her soul, the passion, the strength, the fearless part of her that had kissed him and shattered walls, was violently snuffed out. A yawning, absolute cold filled the void. She collapsed, a silent, breathless agony locking her limbs. The world grayed out. Rhys, connected to the bond's intricate architecture, felt it as a system failure. The sudden absence was a black hole in his mind, sucking his clarity, his strategic sense, into a vortex of sheer, howling loss. He dropped to his knees, clutching his head, a broken sound escaping him. Soren, the anchor, felt the earth itself lurch. The stabilizing triad was now an unstable dyad. The empathetic link that shared joy and comfort now became a floodgate for unmitigated, mortal agony and desperate, lonely sacrifice. He cried out, falling forward, his connection to the living world fraying into threads of despair. Kael lay on the cracked floor, the shadowy tendril retracting back into the pit, leaving a ghastly wound. His eyes, already dimming, found Elara's. There was no smug triumph, no fury, only a profound, heartbreaking apology. His lips moved, forming a soundless word. Safe. Then his eyes closed. The brilliant, volatile, blazing star of Kael's presence in the bond winked out into a silence more terrible than any scream. The bond was a crippled, shivering thing. 2 threads dangled, raw and bleeding. The third was gone. The entity's satisfaction was a cold wave that washed over the broken hall. It had not just harmed an alpha. It had broken the triad. It had shattered the convergence. Elara crawled toward Kael's still form, the cold inside her deeper than any winter. This was the curse's final victory. Not through jealousy or rage, but through the ultimate, devastating sacrifice the bond had forced upon them. He had given himself to save her, and in doing so, he had destroyed the very thing that made them whole. Cold. There was only cold where Kael's fire had been, a void so absolute it felt like death itself. Elara knelt over his still form, her hands hovering above the horrific wound, slick with his blood. The world had narrowed to this point. The fading warmth of his skin, the chilling absence in her soul, Rhys's shattered gasp, Soren's weeping. The entity's triumph was a palpable, gloating pressure in the air. It had won. It had broken the lock. The seal was next. But the cold inside Elara began to change. It was not the absence of feeling. It was the feeling itself, a grief so vast, a love so desperate, a rage so pure it had its own temperature. It was the silent scream of the bond itself, protesting its mutilation. She was not just a recipient of their power. She was not just the apex. The union had shown her the truth. She was the conduit. The bond did not just connect them to her. It flowed through her. She was the heart that pumped their shared lifeblood, and a heart does not accept amputation. Her head lifted. Tears still streamed down her face, but her eyes were no longer desolate. They blazed with a light that was not gold. Not silver, not green, but a terrifying, brilliant white. No, she whispered, the word not a plea, but a decree. She placed her bloodied hands directly on Kael's wound. She didn't know healing magic, but she knew the bond. She knew his thread. She could still feel its ghost, its severed end bleeding power into nothing. She closed her eyes. She didn't reach for the missing fire. She reached into the cold void he had left and found it. The echo, the memory, the essential, undeniable truth of Kael that was woven into the very fabric of her being, and into Rhys and Soren. She grabbed it. Not with gentle hands, with the fury of a woman reclaiming a stolen piece of her own soul. Power did not flow from the brothers into her. It erupted from her. She became the nexus, the generator. The 2 remaining threads, Rhys's silver and Soren's green, flared with incandescent light, not feeding her but being supercharged by her. Her will, her love, her refusal became the raw voltage. She channeled it all, Rhys's unyielding will to protect, Soren's profound life force, her own wild, untamed love, and focused it down through her hands, into the ghost of the third thread, into Kael's still heart. Live. The command was not spoken. It was woven into the blast of power. Kael's body arched off the ground. Light, pure, white, and searing, erupted from his chest. From Elara's hands, from Rhys and Soren where they knelt, connected. It filled the cracked hall, burning away the oozing black ichor, scouring the air of the entity's presence. The ghastly wound on Kael's chest knitted itself together, flesh and bone remade not by simple healing, but by reintegration. The severed fiery thread did not just reattach. It slammed back into the braid. Not as it was, but thicker, stronger, magnified by the cataclysmic force of her refusal to let it go. The bond didn't just reform. It evolved. It was no longer 3 threads braided around a 4th. It was a single, seamless, radiant cord of 4 intertwined souls. The convergence was now permanent, total. Kael gasped, a raw, life-filled breath, his eyes flying open. They were no longer just molten gold. They held flecks of Rhys's mercury and Soren's green, just as their eyes now held echoes of his fire and her light. He looked up at Elara, not as his savior, but as his source. His anchor. His heart. The entity's triumphant presence shattered into a shriek of pure, universe-shattering rage and fear. It had sought to break the lock by breaking the bond. Instead, it had forged the bond into something unbreakable. Elara slumped forward, exhausted, her forehead touching Kael's. Rhys and Soren were there in an instant, their hands on her shoulders, on Kael, completing the circle. The new bond hummed between them, a power grid of unimaginable strength. She was not their weakness. She never had been. She was the catalyst, the keystone, the true power. And they were whole. The entity was done with prisons. It tore into the world not as flesh, but as the curse-given furious final form. It saw the 4 points of light, their bond, and recognized its annihilation. It attacked not with claws, but with the corrupted weave of the pact itself. Bands of ghostly thorned chains materialized from the air, whipping towards them, each strike meant to snag and unravel their connection. Chaos erupted. Kael shifted in a blur of rage, meeting a physical manifestation of rock and shadow that erupted beneath him. Rhys shouted coordinates, his mind tracking 3 separate lethal attacks. Soren poured his energy into the earth, trying to root them against a magical tremor. They were defending, reacting, and Elara felt them, straining through the bond. Not just their bodies, but their very spirits, fighting a magical law that sought to bind them. Then, a chain, thicker than the others, snapped straight for Elara's throat. She didn't raise a shield. Something in her, something deeper than fear or training, shifted. The world didn't slow. It changed. The cliff, the sky, Kael's snarl, it all faded. What Elara saw was the architecture of reality. She saw the weave. Before her glowed their bond, a magnificent, 4-pointed star of luminous threads, fiery gold, cool silver, deep green, and at the very center, the brilliant white strand of her own will, braided into a cord of breathtaking strength. But smothering it, sunk into its very fibers, was a cancer. A thorny, pulsing lattice of sickly green-black energy, the Blackwood Compact. It pulsed with malice, and from its central knot poured the monstrous form now attacking them. The entity was the curse, and the curse was this parasitic weave. The attacking chain was just a single, vicious thorn extruded from it. Understanding was instantaneous, total. She was not a wolf, not a witch. She was a weaver. The null who couldn't feel simple bonds because she was built to perceive complex ones. The key because she could interface with magical constructs. The apex because she could channel and direct the power that flowed through those connections. The chain was inches from her skin. Elara didn't move her hands. She moved her attention. With the clarity of a surgeon, she looked at the attacking chain, not as a weapon, but as a flawed thread in the corrupted tapestry. She reached out, not with magic, but with the essence of her being, and she plucked. The chain shattered into motes of dissipating, harmless magic. The entity recoiled, every one of its glowing eyes fixed on her, not with hatred now, but with primal, terrified recognition. Weaver, the word was a shockwave of dread. Elara took a step forward, her physical eyes seeing the monster, her weaver's sight seeing the diseased lattice at its core. "You're not a demon," she said, her voice echoing with new power. "You're a mistake, and I am the correction," the entity shrieked, lashing out with everything, shadow, stone, and the full crushing weight of the ancient pact. The brothers fought, but they were battling symptoms. Elara saw the disease. "Kael!" she called, and through the bond she didn't send a feeling. She sent a pattern, the flaw in the stone fist forming to his left. He pivoted and struck, and it crumbled. "Rhys!" She sent a pathway, the trajectory to avoid the snapping psychic jaws. He flowed aside effortlessly. "Soren!" She sent a frequency, the resonant pulse to stabilize the fracturing ground beneath them. The earth stilled. She was no longer just their heart. She was their architect. The silver torque on the bedside table caught the light. It was off for now. Here, she was not the Weaver Queen. She was just theirs. The day unfolded in a series of small, perfect moments.